two Venezuelan F-16s roared over a U.S. destroyer in international waters. Provocative, dangerous, and risky. But here's the twist. Instead of being intimidated, the USS Jason Dunham quietly turned the encounter into a live intelligence harvest. Every radar ping, every comms frequency, and even the heat trails off those aging engines were captured in detail. So was this really Venezuela flexing strength? Or did they just hand over their secrets on a silver platter? Stick around, because this flyby wasn't just reckless. It was a massive mistake Venezuela can't undo. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Two aging Venezuelan F-16s slicing low over a $1 billion US warship sounds like a show of force. But was it really? From the shore, it looked like an act of defiance. From the deck of the destroyer, it looked very different. The USS Jason Dunham was moving steadily through international waters, its radar systems sweeping the horizon as they had done thousands of times before. Suddenly, the calm green screen lit up with two fast-approaching returns. Crew members tracked the data as the shapes grew sharper, fixed-wing aircraft descending into view. Within seconds, the dots became real planes cutting the sky, two fighters rushing toward the ship's path. On Venezuelan state television, the scene was packaged for effect. Footage of F-16s diving close to an American destroyer ran with dramatic commentary about boldness and standing against foreign power. Crowds back home were shown cheering this defiance, a message crafted to make an aging air force look like a modern spearhead. But the way Caracas framed it and the way Pentagon officials read it were two entirely separate stories. The U.S. side noted the passes as a highly provocative move, one that could push a tense moment into something far worse if even a single calculation went wrong. For the crew of the Jason Dunham, though, there was no rush of panic. Naval procedures are built around these very scenarios. Protocols dictate how radar operators respond, how weapons crews stand ready but silent, and how officers measure distance and altitude without letting adrenaline press the wrong button. So instead of changing course or firing a warning shot, the destroyer held steady, its sailors calm in the middle of what the other side wanted to look like intimidation. Years of training had carved out a rhythm where silence often counts more than any weapon. Compare this moment to Cold War stories now buried in archives, where close calls between American and Soviet pilots nearly erupted into battles no one planned. Fighter planes brushing too close over the Baltic Sea. A submarine surfacing beneath a U.S. carrier by mistake, missiles locking on targets, only to be switched off at the final second. Time and again, Restraint avoided war. Officers who stayed steady on their instruments instead of firing became the quiet heroes who prevented history from twisting down a darker path. On board the Jason Dunham, the same discipline applied. The apparent intimidation move was carefully mapped out across a web of sensors. Radar painted every curve of the jet's approach. Thermal cameras measured heat emissions. Electronic support systems marked frequencies like clockmakers building a profile. What for Venezuelan audiences became a proud image of power was for the U.S. crew nothing more than a predictable exercise in patience and procedure. But here's where the image peeled apart. The Venezuelan F-16s were not fresh off production lines. These were decades-old fighters struggling with maintenance routines and part shortages, facing off against a destroyer that carried not only surface-to-air missiles, but also layers of defensive systems. Their stunt looked less like dominance and more like exposure. Out-of-date avionics, reduced spare jets, to even maintain standard patrols, and a fleet straining under budget cuts. All of it was symbolized by those two planes skimming recklessly over a warship built for modern threats. What began as a bid to look dangerous shifted under the weight of reality. The older jets showed their limitations in plain sight. Their role in the flyby underscored just how thinly stretched Venezuela's air assets had become. The asymmetry between their aircraft and the destroyer's technology left no doubt about who actually commanded the field. What looked powerful was instead a reminder of how fragile the Venezuelan Air Force had grown. But here's the hidden truth. Far from being a danger to the ship, those flybys were a golden opportunity for the Navy. The fighters roared by, But instead of sparking fear, every second became priceless intelligence. For the U.S., on the outside, the event looked like nothing more than two jets buzzing past a warship. Inside the Jason Dunham, though, it became something else entirely. The Combat Information Center didn't treat it as a moment of danger, but as an opening. Monitors flickered to life with feeds from multiple systems, and operators began cataloging everything that came off the approaching aircraft. From the first radar return, the ship was already pulling apart the encounter piece by piece, turning it into hard data that could be used for years. When most people think of a destroyer under threat, they picture orders shouted across the deck, missiles armed, or guns swung toward the sky. That expectation is natural. But during this pass, silence was more valuable than noise. No one fired, no smoke trails marked a missile locking on target. Instead, Restraint allowed every electronic signal the jets used, every radar chatter and burst of communication, to come in clean. With weapons idle, no interference masked the incoming signatures. What the Venezuelan pilots thought was a bold flyby instead became a gift to the Navy's electronic warfare operators. The ship's radar plotted flight paths with exact coordinates. Every change in altitude was drawn onto the screen as a line in the digital record. But radar was only one layer. The destroyer's electronic warfare suite scanned the spectrum and captured how the jets were communicating with ground controllers. Frequency bands, encryption levels, even bursts of radio static were locked in. Once stored, those recordings would be sent back for analysis, broken down to find weak spots, gaps in encryption, or repeated phrases that could expose network routines. Each second added more to the profile. It didn't stop there. Infrared sensors on board picked up the heat blooming from the fighter's turbines. Every aircraft engine leaves a distinct thermal pattern depending on age, maintenance level, and internal wear. By absorbing those signatures as the jets roared overhead, the ship collected unique fingerprints that could later tag the same aircraft again, even under cloud cover or at night. The Venezuelan F-16s unknowingly revealed exactly who they were in a database that never forgets. Even their flight behavior told stories. They closed in at predictable altitudes, adjusted speed at certain distances, and pulled maneuvers that looked textbook. That predictability spoke volumes. It allowed analysts to map out what Venezuelan Air Force training looked like in practice. Did the pilots follow routines drilled into them years ago? Did they repeat turns at certain intervals? Each small move painted strands of a larger picture. And when stitched together, those strands showed not just how two jets behaved on one afternoon, but how all pilots under that program might handle similar engagements. Modern sea power, then, is not simply a contest of missiles and guns. It is a contest of who controls the flow of information. And in this case, Venezuela handed that control over without even realizing it. Venezuela set out to show strength, but in reality, every second of that flyby handed the Navy critical intelligence. What looked like defiance exposed weak technology, predictable maneuvers, and communication habits that could be tracked for years. The destroyer never fired a shot. Its sensors and restraint carried the day. Modern conflict isn't won by who makes the loudest gesture. It's won by who patiently records, studies, and adapts. Information, not old hardware, shifts the balance. If you stood on the destroyer's bridge that day, would you have stayed steady or ordered a warning shot? Let us know below.